All right, so, okie doke. Hello, everybody. So yeah, this seems like a bit of a sort of like epic kind of brooding title, but I swear it's not. So I think I'm gonna kind of shift the tone of things a little bit. Everybody's been talking this morning about things that are, very practical and strategic, and it's entirely necessary, but I'm kind of here to disrupt that a little bit and help us sort of maybe hopefully think about why we think we need the digital in the gallery and what it means for us as Caribbean people. So let's see, hopefully I can use this. Right, upside down. Awesome, all right. So what do we mean by digital here? Right, the digital technically is obviously that binary system. I know generally as Caribbean people, especially suppose in Cayman, you don't really like a binary, black or white, male, female, whatever. We kind of like things that are a little bit in the gray area. And actually, by the way, at the top, that is how you spell digital in binary code. That's 0010000, which is kind of fun. Right. So the digital is obviously the system of ones and zeros that sort of helps us to produce, information on screens and things like that. But it's also, the actual apparatus that we use to show it. So, I suppose in thinking of gallery spaces and things, that's kind of, visual art in its purest form is just light, right? So if you're showing digital work, it's kind of, in a way, it's kind of like art in its pure form, if you want to think of it that way. Also, I hate how we kind of use the word post on the end of everything, but for the sake of argument, I'm going to use it here. A lot of people in art think that we're currently in sort of a period of post-digital art, but what they really are kind of looking at with that is not the fact that people are just using, digital means to display artwork, but that they're actually using it as material. So people are gathering things from the internet and things like that to kind of produce work, which is kind of fun. Right. And of course, when we think about the digital, we also think about the internet, which, as you can see from this quote here, it has its roots in war, which seems really, again, dark and brooding, but it's also kind of an interesting way to think about things, because the main thing that at least I'm going to be looking at here is how we can use the digital and the internet to sort of decentralize sort of major power, and so we can kind of claim our own power back. So yeah, development of the internet can be traced back to the desire to construct a network that would decentralize communications in the event of a large-scale attack and nuclear war. Very scary stuff, but we can kind of use that for more positive means. Right, so, sorry, that's a bit cough. All right, so yeah, what does digital mean for us as Caribbean subjects, and what are the implications of using it here? Krista Thompson is a Bahamian, I suppose you could think of her as an art historian and cultural theorist in a lot of ways, and how she looks at sort of how the region in general is shaped by our colonial past and everything like that. And to quote her from one of her recent books, An Eye for the Tropics, which kind of frames how the Bahamas and a lot of the Anglo-Caribbean as regions were quite physically, literally shaped by tourism. She quotes here, "The colonial era tourism promoters literally used photographs to project a new vision of the Anglo-Caribbean islands before the eyes of North American and British traveling publics. In these photographs, tourism propagandists often visualized and promoted what they deemed to be the island's picturesque qualities." Now, the reason I've used this here is because, how, at least I think it's fair to say, how we come to know ourselves generally as Caribbean people, a lot of it has kind of come through the tourist image that we've put forward. But that feels, disgenuine. It doesn't feel like it's us. But how do you sort of begin to combat that when that's something that's been happening from the 1800s with colonial photography and everything? How do you begin to find a way to know yourself and know your identity that's away from this problematic picturesque and the tropicalization of the region and stuff? We're all very proud of how we look as a region. We're very proud of how beautiful it is, but part of that was shaped by colonial tourism, because I know in Nassau in particular anyway, beautiful big trees everywhere, but half of them were planted by people for the sake of colonial powers coming over and taking pictures of things, because they kind of promoted tourism to a lot of the people in Britain for the Bahamas as a way to come and take nice photos, which is, it's kind of great, and not a lot has really changed in that way, because people kind of still use it as a backdrop for their photographs for holidays and things, but it's a very problematic way to kind of get to know yourself when everything about your region has been shaped by tourism, right? But yeah, I'll talk more about that later. Right. So on the other side of things, when we're looking at the digital, how do we come to know ourselves as modern subjects when we had no major part to play in modernism? We've kind of had to arrive at it, Everybody's kind of being forced to kind of chug along with, the digital revolution and everything like that. So how do we begin to sort of rethink of ourselves? Well, Stuart Hall, in a conversation with Michael Hart, I believe, was discussing, in particular, conversations that he had with David Scott on how we are seen, or he sees us anyway as well, as conscripts of modernity. So again, the people who kind of had to arrive at modernity but never played any major part in things. We just kind of got chugged along like war conscripts. So now this is the fun stuff. All right. So nomadism, generally, sort of first conceived by Deleuze and Guattari and all their sort of wonderful work on ideas of rhizomes, so like lots of little clusters of power that sort of connect all together. So that's like kind of, they began with it, and it was generally conceived as sort of a way of looking at warfare and how to, again, decentralize things. But Rosie Bray-Dotty takes a much more positive take, and she kind of applies their ideas about nomadism and like the mobility of it and like lines of flight and sort of, mobility of ideas. And she kind of applies it in a much more positive way, which I was really attracted to because I think we have too much doom and gloom in the region. And as we saw in the presentation from the African American Museum yesterday, if you change your perception of how you think about things, it feels a lot more empowering. And it feels a lot less like we're being bogged down by our histories. So I'm kind of going with what she's kind of thinking about here. And a lot of what I found quite interesting in how she talks about ideas is that they're not just this thing floating around in space, just the same as like, the digital isn't something that's just floating around in space. It's not just code, that's just kind of like in the ether. She thinks very much about how these things are physically rooted as well. So like, you can think about how you physically put the digital in the gallery space, but also, in terms of thinking about ideas, the brain is a physical thing, and it's using, electricity, which is a physical thing, to sort of send messages around. So she talks a lot about ideas of the embodiment of ideas and the embrainment of the body. So it's kind of like a nice balance of things. You can't really forget one or the other. They're all tied in, which I think is a much more holistic way to look at things and, kind of could possibly help us in how we think about sort of the, I guess, how ideas around the region sort of float around, but then we can physically ground ourselves in some sort of way to kind of move past the more negative stereotypes. All right, so again, mobility and all that wonderful stuff. I just really like the bicycle, I'm sorry. Right, so to kind of start to root her theories a little bit, I'm gonna talk about Blue Curry, and that is actually his name. He's a Bahamian artist who does absolutely fabulous work that sort of subverts our sort of ideas of tourism and consumerism in the Bahamas and in the Caribbean as a region. He kind of plays a lot with stereotypes. It's usually quite amusing. And this is a work called SSS. And the interesting thing about this work, it was for Site Santa Fe in, 2014, which is a big festival. And he essentially, the work itself as it exists, it was a live stream of cruise ships from Nassau coming in and out of the harbor. And every cruise ship had a towel that he designed in a particular way that ended up going up on this flagpole. So each cruise ship had a flag that was a beach towel. So it's like, kind of tying together all those ideas of tourism in a really kind of fun and funky way. But the thing that I'm most interested about is the fact that they're bringing this digital live stream of these ships coming in and out into the gallery space. But how does the work actually exist? Does it exist as, these towels and like this screen showing this thing going up and down, or does it exist on the internet as, as it is, as a live stream? I'm not entirely certain, and I think it's kind of interesting to pose those kind of questions with work because, again, it's sort of rethinking how we view digital in the space. Because I think often for gallery spaces, we think of the digital as, okay, good, we need new technology in here so that people kind of realize that, we're going with the times and stuff. And it's like, actually, it's more of an interesting way to look at what an artwork is or how it functions or how it can function and how we are, conscripts of modernity, moving with the times and thinking about how we shape and reframe ourselves as Caribbean subjects. On the other side of things, you have, I think just about every gallery in the Caribbean is really working on having a strong web presence, which is of utmost importance considering, how strong and widespread our diaspora is. It's a way for people to connect. And interestingly, it's a way of bringing the physical gallery space to the internet, which, is sort of like the central hub of connectivity, I know for me, at least, like in university, I felt very disconnected from, a lot of what was going on. I had no idea about what was going on in Nassau for art until I found ARC magazine. I don't know if anybody follows ARC. They have like physical magazines, but it does function primarily as sort of like a blog-based website. But it's a really, really, really amazing way, and I can't stress this enough, it's an amazing way to keep up with what is going on in the region for art. It's entirely holistic. It's moving away from these sort of difficult ideas around nationalism that we have as Caribbean subjects, because I think a lot of us know, we really struggle to get to know ourselves, as I mentioned earlier, because, our history is very difficult, and generally how we come to see our identity is in a very new sort of space. So it's hard to get to know yourself when you're in this sort of sense of flux. And that leads to a lot of tension between different Caribbean islands, no, I'm better because I'm Jamaican, no, I'm better because I'm Bahamian, whatever. And it's just the wonderful thing about ARC is that it kind of helps people to move past that and to just feel a sense of pride in the region and to get to know yourself better. Because you can't get to know yourself unless you know your neighbor. I see so many similarities between Cayman and the Bahamas, but at the same time, seeing those similarities helps me to know what's exactly particularly different about us, which is kind of the beautiful thing. It's we're similar as a region, but there's so much more multiplicity to our experiences than we realize. And ARC was a really good way to kind of not only feel connected, but also to kind of feel a sense of community, which is what, the sort of lighter part of the internet is about. It's about finding your little pockets of, places where you feel you can fit, or places where you can feel like you find yourself expressed, which I think is entirely important, especially, again, like I said, for students, but also for our diaspora in general. Okay. And social media, right? So I know people kind of either love or loathe social media as it is right now. People think that they're entirely always in their phone, posting about their life instead of actually living it. And Guy Debord made a really great quote on how essentially society has ascended from being and actually existing into just having things, because all the problems with capitalism that we know so well, to actually just appearing. And I feel like that's a really apt way to look, or how a lot of people anyway look at social media. We feel like our lives are what we appear to be rather than what we're actually living. Because, people have those Instagram lives and everything like that. And even in art, there's curator selfies, all this kind of stuff. I don't know if anybody has seen, but Snapchat, there's a load of great Snapchats of people in art museums just giving ridiculous quotes to Elgin marbles and things like that. And it's kind of great. But yeah, it's probably a negative way to look at things that you're not really living, you're just sort of curating a vision of how you're living. But again, as Caribbean subjects, we can kind of use this to our advantage and to, more positive means. So basically, I don't know if anybody's heard of the Everyday Africa project. It's absolutely brilliant. It's this social media-driven project wherein basically African peoples from, including, sort of regions that people don't really think of as African, so people from Morocco and everywhere else, are all including images on social media of their everyday lives. And it's a way to sort of reframe the region away from, the sort of consistent poverty-stricken image that they always have. Because quite frankly, as we know anyway, Africa's a lot more than that, just like we're a lot more than our tourism. And so the Bahamas adopted this in a really fun way for the Everyday Bahamas project, and invited people to take Instagram photos of their everyday lives, or just, anything that they felt was meaningful to them. Let me see. So, yeah. So that was what we ended up doing was taking these Instagram photos and printing them out and displaying them in the gallery space, which in itself feels kind of like a subversive act in a gallery, because it's taking people who aren't even really artists, which is kind of great. It's inclusive, in its nature, just like the internet. And it's just kind of a beautiful thing because of again, that inclusivity and what we're striving for in the gallery, which is to make everybody feel like they can join in. And actually, when you look at it, a lot of the images, like, obviously, yeah, there were some artists who joined in. There are also, you know, people of all ages and whatever else. And it's just kind of beautiful to see how people frame their own experiences in the region. And it was, at least for me, I feel like it's quite a poignant thing because it's a way of feeling like we can show ourselves instead of showing that image that always gets put forth. It's a way for us to kind of subvert that and a way for us to find our own power in things. And in terms of, you know, sort of nomadism and everything else, having all these small bands and pockets of people sort of making their own strides in sort of empowering themselves and finding their own ways of representing themselves on the internet, it's a way to decentralize that, you know, very old colonial image that we have of ourselves that's very problematic and that we still kind of struggle with now. So, I mean, it's a positive way to do it. It's quite a happy way to do it. And, you know, again, it sort of is a way to think about getting people who wouldn't normally be in the gallery, and to let them know that that is their space. Because, I mean, I don't know if it's a problem you have here, but generally, like in the Bahamas, Bahamians feel like the space is not for them. We feel like the space is primarily for tourists. And like was mentioned in one of the other presentations, I think it was Stephanie from Bermuda, and she was mentioning how people were like, oh, this is such a, you know, terrible travesty. What about the tourists? Like, you know, it's our space first, and it's our home first. It's just we're sharing our home with other people, you know. We might be the backdrop to a bunch of people's social media, you know, pictures for their holidays and things, but that doesn't mean that we can't tap into that same thing and show them, hey, you know, we're more than hotels, you know, we're people with lives and a really rich and vibrant set of experiences that kind of go way beyond what our history is. So, yeah, it's kind of a way to kind of help us find our own strength, to feel empowered, and to sort of unify as a region to show our multiplicity of experience. And I think if we sort of begin to think about the digital in that sort of way, rather than, you know, just keeping up with the Joneses and trying to, you know, look as if we're keeping up with the modern that major Western galleries have, I think we'll find that we have a much more sort of meaningful sort of vein to mine. And I think we'll kind of start to produce more, I don't know, more of a sense of empowerment in ourselves. So, right, and that's it. Thank you.
All right. We have question time too. Thank you so much. There's a lot of really wonderful ideas, I think, that you generated there.
Sorry.
That's okay. And if you haven't read Krista Thompson's book, by the way, which really feeds into the Everyday Project, it's a fantastic read. And I think that's a project, again, which has been really useful to hear because we can all reproduce that very easily in our own communities. And it kind of bridges between what we were talking about yesterday, which is this co-curating and how do we get the audience to be very much part of the conversation. So I think it was fantastic. Thank you. We have time for a couple of questions. Shireen, we're on time? Okay. Nicole?
Sorry. Do we hide
the microphone?
There we go. It's over there. Good.
Hey. Yes, it was very interesting and brought me back to lots of things that I haven't, you know, Michael Hart and all these people haven't that in a while. I did want to though just trouble one of the sort of foundational comments, particularly about modernity. And I'm thinking about this a lot more because of the presentation about the African American History and Culture Museum yesterday. Yes, the idea of the Caribbean and other people that were affected by colonialism as kind of conscripts of modernity, that we were sort of pulled into this project. Yes, I totally, I understand where that comes from. But I think it's really important to distinguish between, I mean, I don't think that saying that we didn't, our contribution to modernity is questionable or unclear. I think it's really important to make that distinction because from my perspective, a lot of my research and writing is about us as the navel of modernity. Like it started with us. Like And there are also a lot of people who write about it from that perspective. And so in shifting how we view objects and whose perspective we apply, I think it's really important to kind of acknowledge that like agency and the fact that power doesn't exist without resistance, one,
True.
and two, the people who built modernity were us, right?
True.
On literally, quite literally on our backs. So I just wanted to make that distinction because I think that talking about those concepts becomes so super rich and interesting when that other perspective is brought in. And I can tell that you're kind of, you're like poised for that kind of engagement and movement. So I really look forward to seeing what else you're producing. But that's something that's, that I think about a lot, and so just wanted to kind of add to the
No,
conversation.
that's important. I think it's also been kind of like a big theme of this is like finding our own agency in things. So you're totally right.
Right.
For sure. Because like we said, like it's how you sort of think about yourself. We kind of forget that we aren't, just victims and that we did, fight and, held up that resistance and contribute. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I feel you. Sorry.
I just want to be really quick and then I'll pass it. I just wanted to say for all the other museum people here to shout out to it was the phone company that sponsored that show. So they're very good because of the mobile phone situation. So that's just my tip for anyone that wants to do something like that where they're from, is to go to the phone company because they actually finance that. So director thing to say.
Sorry, thanks.
Hi. It's not actually a question, it's a comment, which says that I can see a divide between the younger artists and vision for galleries versus older ones like me, who we want to see our image and maybe interact with it in a different way. And so maybe there is some conversation that needs to happen with that. And I don't know what, but I just throw it out as, I'm
Just
sitting
sort of
here
addressing the
listening and
disparity
I'm
there.
saying this is a different type of vision. And I know things are changing, but maybe, we do need to stop and look at that or talk about it.
I feel you.
And I think we should say that this is one project of the NAGB that is multiple. So we learned from Amanda yesterday about some of the more traditional work that they're doing too, and it's having those different dialogues in the same space, which I think is making us trying to be as innovative by also honouring tradition, and it's making us some very exciting places to be right now, I think. So thank you so much, Natalie. So we have a short coffee break, and then we're coming back with 3 more presentations.